Production funding is provided by A. Reddix and Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Think about this for a moment. What if you lived in an inner city neighborhood where the closest supermarket was several miles away? You rely on public transportation to get there because you do not have a car, and you have to take your children with you. Now, because the bags are heavy, you can only buy 1 or 2 days' worth of groceries. Now, facing all of those obstacles, would you go to the grocery store and buy fresh veggies, or to the closest convenience store or fast food place to get something to eat? There are thousands of people in Hampton Roads who face this very challenge. They live in what are known as food deserts. And here to talk about ways to eat healthy despite the challenges are CHKD pediatrician Dr. Dominique Williams, Bev Sell, general manager of the 5 Points Community Farm Market, and Delores Adams, Director of Housing Management with Portsmouth Housing and Redevelopment. Welcome to Another View, ladies. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. 23.5 million Americans nationally live in what are called food deserts. 6.5 million are children. Do we have food deserts here in Hampton Roads, Bev?
Absolutely, absolutely. Every poor neighborhood is a food desert. And it's very, very frustrating because it's not only the access, the physical access, it's the financial access to it, as well as I think the big challenge for us is the mindset, because they don't know how to cook. We've got it's either a generation or 2 generations now that we've lost the art of cooking.
Because we've had all these fast food opportunities and
it's become so readily accessible to us.
Now, they describe food deserts as areas with no or distant grocery stores. These can be rural or urban in this area. You're over in Portsmouth, Delores. Food deserts in Portsmouth?
We definitely have food deserts in Portsmouth. I'm part of the Healthy Portsmouth Initiative. The city received a planning grant. It's a 3-year grant, and we've been studying food deserts, walkability issues in the city of Portsmouth. And one thing we noticed was in the downtown area and midtown area, where we have a lot of our low-income housing communities, there was a limited number of grocery stores. You go over the bridge into Churchland, within a 2 or 3 mile radius, you have about 4 or 5 grocery stores. And what I've noticed, and people have told me, in particular our residents in our low-income communities, the prices are higher in the grocery stores in our communities for the fresh fruits and vegetables.
If they have any at all.
If they have any. And the choices are limited. Then if they go out to one of the suburban communities in the area, and they could get higher prices and better choices.
As a matter of fact, Lisa Godley was out recently, and she was talking with some people in the street about food deserts, and here's what one gentleman had to say about it.
It's about getting groceries. Tell me why you came so far.
Well, the reason why I come down to the Farm Fresh is because the store in my neighborhood has a high markup on the groceries, so it's more feasible for me to walk down here and get my groceries and walk 15 minutes back to the house.
He said there was a high markup on foods, that it was difficult. So, Dominique, if you look at all those obstacles, you eat the fast food instead, and then you have a problem with childhood obesity.
Right.
Or obesity, period.
Right. And part of the efforts in research and emerging data is that communities that have a higher proportion of low-income residents or have a higher proportion of minority residents, they may have quite a few stores, but they're primarily convenience stores, and so they don't have access to the healthy food. Well, if everything on television says you need to have 5 fruits and vegetables a day, you need to eat whole grains, but the nearest store to you is a couple of blocks and all you see are brown bananas and dinged up apples, and there's nothing whole wheat or whole grain except for the Pop-Tart, there's no way for you to realistically adhere to the dietary guidelines. So it goes back to what Bev was saying is, you know, we have this generation that even if they're well-intentioned, the tools that are there to help them, they're really not there for certain communities, that they don't have the healthy food available to help them adhere to the healthy guidelines.
So is the thought that from grocery store perspective, I know none of you work for grocery stores, but I'm sure you have opinions on this, that poor people can't afford this food, so we're not going to locate there. Why is this happening?
Well, I think the expense, and I've talked to several managers of grocery stores in different areas, particularly in 5 Points, and they say that it costs so much for security, and I don't know, I'm not buying that that lot, but that's why it's so expensive, is because they have extra cost. And I think we're
quite honestly,
just being
Bev,
used
I've
and
been in
abused.
grocery stores in that same area that you're talking about, and they're not even as clean as other groceries. I mean, when you see dust on the top of a canned good, it doesn't make you really want to go grab that canned good, does it?
Right, and part of the research again would suggest, so what? You put a grocery store in the middle of a economically challenged neighborhood, but are you actually going to contribute space in that grocery store to healthy food? And so they may feel compelled to be in the neighborhood, but are they compelled to actually offer good food? And how much space in that store is used to encourage healthy eating, or is it filled with more processed, high sodium, high fat, high in calorie but low in nutrient foods? So not only do they need to be present in the neighborhood, but they need to be present and actively looking for ways to offer the healthy food. So your observation is true and sad.
Now, there's also preponderance of fast food restaurants, and the pricing makes it so. You were making a comment just before we started the show. You buy a chicken or a chicken dinner,
right,
let's just say.
If you have $5 and the closest grocery store is 3 miles away, and you're not especially motivated to walk 3 miles that day, you take that $5 and let's say it's just you and your child. You can go to a fast food restaurant and buy a protein, so either a burger or chicken, so that's $2. You can buy a larger fry, that's $3. Split that between the two of you, and then each of you can get something to drink. So a drink for your child and a drink for you, and that's $5 versus going outside of your community, feeling like persona non grata, walk in, and the first thing in the produce section is something's $2.99 a pound, and you think to yourself, I have $10, and right now if I get a pound of this to try to feed us for a couple of days or a week, I've just consumed more than $3 of my 10, and I still don't have the meat to go with it, the drink that goes with it, I don't have toilet paper, paper towel, and so, you know, it's a matter of survival, and I think some of the issue of obesity is oversimplified, that it's just poor choices and calories in and calories out. But if it's a choice of survival versus a choice of health, the first thing you'll do is survive, and then when you have the luxury, then you'll try for health. And so our communities and our dilemma is that we need to help our communities come out of survival mode so that they can feel comfortable making decisions for health.
Bev, you started something at the farmers market where you're serving dinners that kind of mirror the same pricing for the fast food place. But what about the attitude? What about changing? In other words, do people look at that and say, well, here's a chance for me to get a well-rounded meal for about the same price?
I think most people just think they're getting a good deal. That's what I think.
Okay.
And I think to piggyback on what you were saying, it's the time element too to prepare a good meal, because we haven't done well with our time management, because it really is an effort. If I can get something quick, I mean, I'm faced with that dilemma, and I'm sure all of us are. Am I going to get something quick? Let me take this home and cook it. I mean, we've got to work all of this in, so now, like everyone else, we cook a little bit more, so we have it left over for later. But the 2 for $10s that we're doing at the market, we're trying to show people that you can eat a balanced meal at a reasonable price. And that's why we're going to have to raise that too, but because of the economy a little bit. But I think people don't realize that, and it's a huge component to all this is education. And we're not coming down on people, because we all own a piece of this. to help educate ourselves to a better way of living, because we're killing each other. I mean, literally killing each other.
But Delores, don't you even notice the difference in convenience stores depending on the neighborhood, even where some convenience stores will be, you know, everything from packaged goods to, you know, false hair to baseball caps. I mean, they're kind of putting everything in one store versus another type that may be also a convenience store, but in another neighborhood that may have bananas and apples and salads and things of that sort.
Most definitely. You know, we have 2 convenience stores, 3. There's a convenience store near each of our, what I call our traditional public housing communities. And what I find interesting about the convenience store is the large amount of beer and wine that's sold in these stores. That seems to be some of the biggest areas of the floor space in those convenience stores. And then we also have, they sell some convenience food, the fried chicken, the, you know, you can get a nice little snack, you know, that's fairly reasonable. Little or no fresh fruits and vegetables. But one thing, we were talking about education earlier. We have to educate the low-income residents on the importance of fresh fruit and vegetables. I remember talking with my son, and he was talking about his kids, and he's like, well, they don't like vegetables. I was like, what do you mean they don't like vegetables? And I was like, how could kids make a decision that they don't like vegetables? But the parents, he and his wife, they didn't make the kids eat them. They didn't prepare them. So the automatic assumption is they don't like them. And that's not acceptable.
I read or listened to a news report recently where Walgreens is in certain cities is starting to add sections in the drugstore where you can buy fresh fruits and vegetables and so forth. Do you think that type of trend will come here? I guess I'm looking for what are we doing now to try to change this?
Well, paramount to the issue is economics. So if someone's adding something, there's an economic impetus for that. And if they're taking it away, it's driven by economics. So it's great that they're adding it. It may very well come to our communities. It will only come if it's economically in the best interest of whoever is offering it. I still feel as though there would be a disparity between which neighborhoods offer these fresh food items versus the neighborhoods that don't. And that even the Walgreens in the inner city will still likely look different than the Walgreens in another higher income, less racially and ethnically diverse community. So, you know, I always tell my patients, get in where you fit in. And if you're in Walgreens and that's where you fit in, get it. If you're at the grocery store and you fit in and you can buy it, get it. If you're at the gas station and that's what they offer, it's a matter of educating, but then liberating people to see this doesn't have to be this, you know, cute, petite, boutique, whatever for the food. The food is there, you need to eat it. If you can afford it, get it. And so my hope is that that it would translate into different neighborhoods, but I don't know.
The farmers market, you purposely located in an inner city neighborhood.
Right.
How has your traffic been? What have you learned? What are the neighbors learning?
I don't think the program's long enough to tell you what I've learned, but the traffic has been interesting. We've had a good cross-section of folks, and I hope that continues because we're not catering to one particular audience. We always say we want good food for good folks, and that's what we're about. But again, some of the things that we're looking to do, because in addition to cooking classes, are canning classes, because it's teaching
back to the future.
Well, I keep saying we got to go back so we can go forward, and those are the types of things that I think will make it'll be more affordable. Hopefully, it'll last longer, and you can eat through the winter. Because in this particular area, January, February, March, we have to go regional. We can't go local. So I'm encouraging people to freeze more, to blanch the green beans and put them in the baggie and freeze them, and you'll have them for soups and so forth out of season in January and February, so you can still eat nutritionally without having to worry about having it available.
And Delores, you guys have community gardens.
We are
right?
actually implementing those programs. We are looking. We are working with the Virginia Cooperative Extension in one of our developments to start a community garden for the residents. They came out earlier this year and did some classes for the residents on gardening. So our residents planted flower gardens, and someone planted a couple of vegetable plants. So now we're going to have a space designated in the community that we're going to set aside so they can start a community garden. And we're looking long term as part of the Healthy Portsmouth initiative at taking it was an old nursery site in one of our public housing communities and turning that into a community garden. It's already fenced in, so it's a nice space. And we're hoping that we can maybe possibly turn it into some micro enterprise for some of the residents there. But we can grow our own fresh fruit.
But you know, I got to tell you guys, because I hear this and I keep seeing these stories about, you know, the community gardens and the farm markets and so forth, but that takes time. And we're all talking about how we don't have time. So you really think you get the buy-in from people to go out there and actually dig in the dirt and do what has to be done to raise those vegetables?
I think it's gonna take, it goes back to the education piece, and it goes back to selling it and how people can see how this is going to really help me. We can get the one thing we noticed when we first started the gardening classes out in our Swanson home community, where you had a lot of the elderly, the senior residents that were they were involved with it. They loved it. Because even before we started it, we had a group of residents that cared about their lawns. They would plant their flowers every year, and they did that on their own. So you have a group, and then what we're trying to do is get some of the younger people, if they get the kids involved and tell them, because the complaint I hear over and over again from the parents and the kids, there's nothing to do. Well, here's something to do. Here's something to do.
That one of the things that they say though about farmers markets and all too is that the food is expensive.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. But you know, the bottom line for us is in this country we spend less than 9% of our family income, less than any other country in the world, okay? And if we don't start paying a little bit higher prices, and I think a lot of the fast food industry has brought the price of our food down, which consequently has brought the income of the farmer down. So we're losing our farmer. They're having to work full and part-time jobs so they can stay on the land. So we've got to strike that balance where, yes, you're going to pay 25 cents more for something, perhaps. But you're also helping to save a small farmer stay on the land.
But also aren't there programs, and it's not called food stamps anymore, it's EBT, that you can use in these different stores, at farmers markets and at grocery stores, so that you can stretch your dollars a little bit more.
Right, and that goes back to educating. So you have to educate the recipients of the SNAP benefits or the supplemental nutrition benefits, educate them on the farmers markets that will accept them. And the other thing is, don't sleep on the frozen fruit or vegetable, because in the beginning it was fresh. And so a lot of times families may say, look, I'm educated, I'm motivated, I'm just fiscally challenged. I can't afford to waste money because this food item has spoiled. You know, what do I do if it takes a while for my child to eat this or for us to eat it? And if there isn't fresh produce or fresh vegetables, if there aren't in the grocery store in the front, then go to the frozen aisle and see if you can find a frozen version that will keep longer. It may cost you a little bit less. You still get a serving of that item until we make the system changes to make fresh fruit and vegetable easily accessible.
So we know, and we've got less than a minute left, but we know we've got systemic changes that must happen in order to make this happen. But in the meantime, I'd like to hear from each of you just a piece of advice that you'd give to all of us, but particularly to those who face food desert, who live in food deserts, to change a habit so that they can start to eat better. I'll start with you, Dominique.
I think I would go back to the issue of frozen fruits and vegetables, and that many stores have a store brand version that is less expensive than going to the fresh produce. It gives you a chance to experiment with it, and naturally allowing it to thaw in the refrigerator means you don't necessarily have to cook it. So think simple and basic and go with frozen first.
Okay, Beth?
I'm going to suggest that they try one particular vegetable that they like, try it fresh, and they won't go back to a frozen. So,
Okay, go fresh in.
And I would just say, I like to say everyone should try to have at least one vegetable a day. Particularly when you think there's some people that eat no vegetables a day, be it fresh or frozen. Just make an effort to incorporate a vegetable.
Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this is something that people really need to focus on, and hopefully we can start to change some policies and move in the right direction. And when we come back, another view of the Civil War from historian Dr. James Horton. But first, here's what's happening in Hampton Roads. If you want to know just about anything regarding race relations and the Civil War era, just ask Dr. James Horton. This renowned historian spent today in Hampton Roads chairing a signature conference titled Race, Slavery, and the Civil War, the tough stuff of American history and memory. The conference is hosted by Norfolk State University and is part of the sesquicentennial Civil War Conference commemorating Virginia's participation in the American Civil War. Our Lisa Godley recently had the opportunity to sit down with this scholar of American history as he discussed how race relations influenced America's 16th president.
We've all heard stories about Abraham Lincoln, but very few people can reach back in history and draw you into the life and times of our 16th president, like Dr. James Horton.
Lincoln is my #1 favorite historical flip-flopper. In fact, in his first inaugural address, he says, "I have no intention of interfering with slavery in places where it currently exists, but what he wants to do is to keep it from expanding." The last speech that Abraham Lincoln ever makes in 1865 is the war is just over, and there is this debate about how former southern states are to be brought back into the United States. And so he's talking about Louisiana. And he says, in Louisiana, those African Americans who are literate and those African Americans who have served in the war ought to have the right to serve in juries, be elected to office, have full citizenship rights in Louisiana as it returns to the nation. As Lincoln gave that speech, in the audience, there was a man who was Southern, and he was made furious by the speech. His name was John Wilkes Booth. Booth was standing next to a friend. He gave him his little poke with his elbow, and he said, "That's the last speech that man will ever make." In a matter of weeks, John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln because he thought Abraham Lincoln had moved too much towards believing in racial equality.
Dr. James Horton is a historian emeritus at the Smithsonian and will join some of the nation's finest historians here on the NSU campus as they hold an open and honest discussion about the role of race and slavery in the Civil War. This conference is part of the sesquicentennial U.S. Civil War observances, and Dr. Horton is conference chair.
Dr. Horton says it was the role that African American soldiers played in the Civil War that caused Frederick Douglass to approach President Lincoln in the first place. Douglass was seeking equal pay for African American soldiers who'd reached the same rank as white soldiers. He says it was after that initial meeting that the two men became great friends.
He invited Frederick Douglass to come to the inaugural address. That was interesting. But even more interesting, he invited Frederick Douglass to come to a party at the White House after the inaugural address. He walks into the room where this gigantic party is going on. In the middle of the room, there is Abraham Lincoln surrounded by people. And Lincoln says in front of the whole room, he says, "Oh, there's my friend Frederick Douglass." And then he says, "Frederick, I want to ask you how you like my speech." And he says, "There's no person in this country whose opinion I care more about on this issue." You can see how Abraham Lincoln is changing over time. What it shows is that there are things happening in society that had the potential for changing people, and in this case, for changing the President of the United States. Unfortunately for the President of the United States, but also unfortunately for the nation, he is assassinated in 1865. And so some of the things that would have resulted from his change, some of the things that would have resulted possibly in the structuring of the period of Reconstruction, does not happen because Lincoln is dead.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
It's just an exciting history to hear, and it's all going on over at Norfolk State University. And we are excited here at WHRO to tell you about our latest documentary. It's called Code Switching, and it is produced and hosted by our very own Lisa Godley. She's been busy working on the hour-long program that will examine the issue through the lens of education, the workplace, society, those who by necessity have had to code switch in life, and those today who refuse to do it. What is code switching? It's the ability to move from informal to formal English at the correct time in the correct setting. It's a fascinating subject, and you'll want to tune in this coming Monday, September 27th at 8 p.m. right here on WHRO TV. And next week on Another View, we'll continue the conversation on code switching from an African American cultural perspective. We'll see you next week for Another View.
Production funding is provided by A. Reddix & Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.